There's tons of research out there, so it's difficult to get into a very technical discussion. So today's discussion is really to provide sort of an overview of key insights that we've taken from research linked directly to industries and some of the things that we can see that is happening within the factory fence. And then I'm just going to take you through some high points that I think hopefully, as we grow in awareness and start to have these discussions, we start to replicate it across the different industrial sectors, and hopefully with that start to see some real changes. So for those of you that went in the first session, I think just to put some context, we are a water scarce country by definition. So there may be areas in the country where you have extreme scarcity and others where you have some stress because of the rainfall patterns, but the bottom line is, from a physical point of view, we are a water scarce country. The good news, though, from an industry perspective, and I put the slide up again, is water crisis is now being elevated, even in the business sector. So I think if I look at it in terms of our portfolio, I would say, if I'm being honest, some of the small to medium companies weren't taking water that seriously. So we spent a lot of time doing lots of pilots, not necessarily getting a huge return on investment for some of that. But what we are seeing is the corporates are starting, through the UN CEO initiatives, etc., and various water resources group initiatives, start to look at this a lot more seriously. So research focus in industry, to a large extent, has looked at effluent production. Why? Because a lot of industries that are within, say, the municipal boundaries tend to discharge their water into wastewater treatment plants. And this has a direct impact, so even though it may be 10 to 20% of the total wastewater, it has a major impact on how those wastewater treatment plants operate. So research has focused a lot on the end-of-pipe treatment. It's looked a little bit, and my colleague Andre was saying I'm yesterday's news by using the term cleaner production, but I'll still do it, as well as looking at reuse, recycling, and then on a more sort of a long-term basis, looking at beneficiation and industrial ecology, because those two aspects are directly linked to whether there are markets available, not necessarily whether we can do something. So if you look at how I would summarize this, our move is not only previously has been to meeting standards and municipal discharge requirements, is now moved to treating water to an acceptable industrial grade water, and in terms of academia, they're starting to look at beneficiation and the biorefinery sort of context. So from an industry overview for South Africa, we do know for the big metros, what are the top 80% water users? We know what are the top 80% effluent production. And what we try and do is then concentrate our research in those areas because we can get more value in terms of that. We have in the past also looked at what is the alignment. So when Environment Affairs creates something like NEMA, what is the impact on the water sector and the consultants and the service providers that are providing guidance? And in that regard, we've created documents where you've got an industry guide, contractors guide, and authorities guide, and then sort of partnered with municipalities like eThekwini to look at what does this mean from a local bylaws point of view. This kind of information is readily available, but I must say, I think if I look at it, the uptake is not as great, and the replication of using the knowledge is probably not as entrenched. So again, we've got technical guidelines for cleaner production, again targeting major industries like the mining sector where you do create a lot of pollution. And in these sort of technical guidelines, we tend to speak around the sort of policy alignment, the legislative alignment, and understanding what does cleaner production mean for you as an industry? What are the tools available? What are the checklists one could use? And then where possible, use both local and international case studies to try and say, yes, it can be done, and it has been done, and what has been the success. We've even created guidelines for waste minimization clubs and gone as far as creating even training material where people can actually set this up and move it forward. From an industry overview point of view, the WRC has created 20 national survey reports of different industries, ranging from malt beer, metal finishing, which is a highly dirty industry, to the steel industry, which was one of the newer ones, which basically was commissioned by the Department of Water and Sanitation. And what these documents actually do is it gives you an overview of the industry. What are the growth projections? What type of industry is it? What are their processes that they use? Where are their water-intensive processes? We've even now added a new layer to it by actually looking at the energy. So at the end of these documents, we can come up with three clear things. A specific water utilization rate or index, a wastewater generation type of profile, understanding what are the typical pollutants within these industries, and then moving towards best practices. So what are some of the processes one could use to sort of deal with your pH or deal with metals or deal with solids or COD. I don't want you to actually get too frightened of this slide. This is just to say this is the kind of overall data. So when people say I can't benchmark, actually you can. This is a 1989 set of documents that was created for industries. It gives you a high-end water, a specific water intake and a sort of a maximum and a minimum value and an average. And if you're an industry, you first have to measure to figure out where you sit and then set some sort of target around it. So we've also created what kind of unit one would use that is applicable for your industry. And so you can actually start to do some of that engagement within the factory fence. Research in terms of industry has thus far concentrated on some of the dirty industries around technology processes. So we have the examples, for example, here where it's a biological and a physical process, which is a biological and a membrane process, and where you can actually treat wastewater up to a quality where it can be reused. Sadly, though, what we see is that, and it was mentioned yesterday in the plenary, industry, especially the small to medium business, they don't have the capex to actually invest in that treatment system. Neither do they have the sort of working, what I call financial models that allow them to do that. And so we're finding increasingly, even if the solutions are there, the uptake for those kind of solutions are not very prevalent. We also see in some of the larger industries, they're starting to look at how do you necessarily use water, treat water and then use it to a certain quality. And so this is a brewery effluent, and the issue here is not so much the technology. The technology, aquaculture is known, hydroponics is known. How do you treat using algal ponds is known, using wetlands is known. The issue here is how do you create the models? So an industry will say, my core business is creating beer. My core business is not dealing with the waste. So now we have to try and figure out what are the enablers. So how do we create the models that provide them with the service providers and the engagements with communities that actually can take this into a more beneficiation type route? In terms of water efficiency and wastewater management, we've done a lot of studies now, which have also been linked to case studies specific to certain industries. So zero liquid effluent discharge is entrenched now within the industrial sector. I mean, it's widely practiced in many of the large industries specifically. We had even dealt, I think, even 10, 15 years back around the green chemistry aspect, especially for the textile industries, where we were basically saying substitute some of your dyes for more biodegradable dyes. And we had gone through an entire piloting exercise, I think, again, with the KZN textile industry. Waste minimization, again, pilots are there and we can understand how to do certain things. What we found in those studies is industries are willing to do the basic housekeeping and get the savings from that, but when you want to take it to the next step to actually get some real changes, then again, it comes back down to the investment costs and capex required. The other aspects, such as life cycle analysis, has had what I call varied acceptance within the sector. You find that with life cycle analysis, academics love it, but we're finding that industries, they basically are not necessarily willing to engage fully on it. They will do once-off studies on it, but not on a routine basis. And it's something that we're trying to drive more in terms of awareness and getting it out there. Pinch has been very successful in some of the high water use industries. So where you use the tool to determine at which point within your operations you can get the maximum savings from a few changes. And more recently, Pinch has now sort of evolved into water optimization modeling, where we actually have, at Wits University, for example, a group that is now done some great work around water optimization. And there, for example, in one of the cases, we were able to using an integrated approach, get a 46 million rand saving for one particular industry. So there are benefits to applying some of these tools in industry, not just from a savings point of view, but because we're actually making a volumetric savings to the industry. And then I just want to speak a little bit more around the water footprints area. What we found with the water footprint type studies is that it opens up a space for sustainability type discussions. It opens up a space for having a discussion around value, use, competing demands, and the scarcity issue. And so business can actually engage from a business risk point of view and business continuity point of view. Here again is another example. This is the energy sector. What you can see when you're doing water footprints, for example, in the energy sector, their grey water footprint is large, but not within their factory fence. The grey water footprint is large upstream, so in the mining sector. So now what this means is from a supply chain policy, they actually have to manage their supply chain upstream and try and encourage them to move to better practices. And if one moves into their operational fence, you'll then find that the operational, or should I say the blue water footprint is higher within that space. And then one can then start targeting as to what are the operations that uses the most water. So in this case, it was the cooling towers. And the example I provided you was where once you figure out that it's your cooling towers that you want to focus on, you then use things like pinch or water optimization modeling, and you can now start figuring out how to save water. In this case, it was a prediction of between 7 to 16% saving. We're talking a massively large water user. That's a big number, basically, for those catchments. And as a benefit, they've actually now found that while looking at this, they were able to also target some real savings within the company. So for a 1.5 million research development initiative around modeling and actually doing the study, realizing 46 million, I think, is a good return on investment. So the take-home messages from the water footprint studies we've done to date is it's important from a business risk initiative. From a policy point of view, so the industry basically says, well, public policy is not very clear in this area, so I think there needs to be better engagement around that area. But I think what we're also seeing is that business policy around how you measure and monitor and understand your water and your water risk is also not very clear. So I think there's some work to be done in that area as well. What has clearly come out, though, from a water footprinting point of view is that it can give you an operational focus area, and then from there you can actually start to get some of the savings. And in certain types of industries, for example, the retail and the beverage, you actually start to see that you need to concentrate on your agricultural supply chain, and that's where you'd get your real benefits. So the future, I think the message is that we need to look both within and outside the factory fence as industry. So once you get your house in order, then there's opportunities for you to actually engage more broadly in the sector. So I just want to say, we often speak as people who do research that nobody's really listening, and you start to create things and nobody really wants to uptake. But I think we're constantly engaging in this area of saying, how do we make sure that the knowledge is taken up and used and we actually do get a behavior change? And I know from an industry point of view, industry and the environment, there's always this bittersweet relationship. So it depends on which side you're listening to. You'll see both sides. Environment always thinks they're getting the bad end of the deal, and industry always thinks they're getting a bad end of the deal. And I think, again, as Michael pointed out, there's a conversation that needs to be had. Regulation and enforcement are two critical areas. If you speak to industry, there's too much regulation. If you speak to environmentalists, there's not enough enforcement. And somewhere along the line, we have to figure out a good way, because there is a clear definition between what we call small, medium, and large industries. Large can deal with a lot of things, medium maybe so much so, but small, we definitely see major issues in terms of managing them. So we need to invest a little bit more and try and figure out what are the financial models that can enable this investment to occur, especially around treatment technology, so that we can improve the kind of cost that is now being taken on by the public sector in dealing with it at your wastewater treatment works. So we need to actually start understanding how do we try to engage with these different industries and start to really understand what type of technologies they should be doing. So quite clearly, from a saving water point of view, we find industries are more readily willing to engage around water saving issues if there's a cost aspect that is linked to the savings. They're less likely to link with the sort of wastewater component of their problems. In fact, I've often heard the story that they will speak about getting involved in research projects for the sake of research projects, so the compliance officer basically gives them more and more time to deal with this. So I don't think that's a very healthy sort of conversation to be had, and I think we just need to have a little bit more plain speaking in that area. Let me just touch on one thing. We really need to measure and manage. Data collection, data management, metering are major issues within industry. It's just not done enough. It's not done accurately. We're not calibrating correctly, and we're actually not basically harmonizing the types of units that we actually want to measure towards. It's important for us to say that with some of the numbers that I provided you in the NAT serves, we need to start benchmarking. We need to benchmark as different businesses within the sector. So if you're a dairy industry, you need to understand what are the lower and the upper, and whether you're within that, and how can you move into a better space. And sometimes, unless someone actually forces you to think in that way, you actually don't set it. Because I'm quite certain that from a productivity point of view, from a profits point of view, there's plenty of benchmarking done. So it's not like the industry isn't used to benchmarking, it's just that they're not used to benchmarking around energy and water. And then finally, once you benchmark, it's then much easier to set targets. And that's where we want to really get to as a country, as industry. We need to actually start saying, how do we set targets that are attainable and reach it? I think yesterday said, if you set it too low, what's the point? There's no challenge in that. So we need to set some benchmarks that allow us then to do things better. Industry constantly says that sometimes there's no expertise, and I don't know if there are service providers here, but they often say there's no expertise to do some of the things that we're asking them to do. So yes, we do understand there are some shortages, but I also wonder whether that's really the correct feeling out there, because when you speak to sometimes a service provider, they say, well, we do have solutions, they're just not willing to pay for it. So there's a different discussion there. And then just to say that for small and medium businesses, it's really all about the partnerships and the collaboration. You don't have to do it alone, but what you do need to do is organize yourselves. So with collaboration, you will create new and better ways of creating those solutions. So from a WRC point of view, for example, because we are knowledge providers, we tend to work in partnership because we can't go and present it at numerous forums, but we're happy for people to take the knowledge and the information forward. So we tend to build partnerships around trying to understand what the issues are and then to get the message across. So we work with these various bodies, and these are just a few, but I think that's the idea, is to organize yourself towards that. And then again, I think, as I said previously, the challenge can bring new innovations. And we need to also understand that sometimes the solutions are quite simple if we're thinking about actually providing the solution. The little graphic about Google there is really about demand. If there is a demand, there is always the willingness to go into that space from a private sector. And so there will be people willing to engage in that space and to get to that. This is an area that I think industry doesn't do enough with. We see major corporations now doing it, but I think small to medium, you need to look at your community and your community engagement and say that for every drop saved by your community is another drop that is available for allocation to industry and to economic growth. And then finally, I think maybe a challenge to industry. Maybe you need to be part of the water-sensitive design revolution. So you need to actually start thinking about how you could do this more innovatively than just sitting and waiting, for public sector to actually provide you with the solutions. And with that, thank you. If you require any of the reports, you can always contact me at the WRC. Thank you.